Hello, and welcome back to our series on discipleship. This is actually kind of the second part of this series, and we've got a new guest with us. Bill Shoemaker works with the General Conference staff in Findlay, Ohio. Bill, what is your official position?
Actually, I carry two different roles, but the job is kind of the same. One is on the denominational level. I am the director for church planting at the denominational level. And then on the regional side, I'm the field director for church planting for Great Lakes, which takes up right now Michigan and Ohio, and are trying to move into Kentucky and Tennessee and develop those new works. So working both sides, but the same issue is church planting.
Okay. So what could you explain a little bit about church planting and what's involved in that process and exactly what you do?
Yeah, it really has to do with my ability of looking at what Jesus said about the fields being one place. In John 4, he talks about the fields being white and ready for harvest. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times there are places where the Holy Spirit's been working, but we don't notice, like the disciples didn't notice that the Samaritans were ready in Samaria. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you see the woman at the well coming to Jesus. She goes and tells her friends. She brings some people back out. Later on, Philip goes there, and there's kind of this big revival going on, and lots of people are coming. And so that's one piece about the field being white, and we have to be able to go out and see that. So I'm assessing what is God doing. But the other piece is in Matthew 9, where Jesus talks about the field, and he says it's plentiful and there's too few workers, and so we need to pray to the Lord of the harvest to send more workers into his harvest field. So I think about looking at the harvest field. Am I noticing things where God could be working that we haven't noticed, and we need to be there? The other is to recognize I need to be looking for planters, people who are sensing God's call. Maybe they've been to seminary, maybe they've been to Bible college, maybe they haven't. They may be in the business field. I've run people who have left the head of an insurance agency. We had a lawyer who said, can I do this? I'm feeling like God's saying quit law practice and to go reach people that I have in contact that know nothing of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So the ability to find, recruit, assess, resource, help do demographics or whatever it takes to get that person God has called in that particular field where they can begin to plant new churches, to reach people that are in two categories. One is unchurched, those who have never been connected. They don't understand culture, they don't understand language, or the de-churched, people who know the culture, know the language, and for some reason have rejected that. Mm-hmm. And so to reach those two people, to get them back within a kingdom mindset of where God is existing and can touch their lives.
That sounds interesting.
Kind of a huge thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So you haven't always done this, though. So
no.
Could you give a little bit of a background of what brought you to this point, the different things you've been involved with
Sure.
in the past?
I felt the call to ministry clear back in late 1960s. Boy, does that age me. That's a scary thing. Like, wow, do we have to talk about that? But he called me to be into ministry and to be a pastor. And then I got scared of that, so I joined the Army in 68 through 71, ran from God's call in my life. He hooked me later as I got ready to get out, brought me back in. I went to Bible college in Fort Wayne, studied for ministry, pastoral role, so I then went to Trinity Seminary, but I pastored while I was in college. And then when I went to seminary, I took over a church plant and helped in a church plant, actually two different ones over in Illinois. So I was kind of doing that when I got out. Then I just entered what I thought was just, it's what you do. You go pastor a church. So then I've pastored some churches. But I've been involved in church planting, interestingly, from those earliest days, from 1974 on about 4 different times. Never thinking to be a church planter, but I did evangelism, or I did training, I did Bible studies, more of an evangelistic Bible study in housing areas. And so I've always done on those levels, but never was the point person. So I've been doing ministry, pastoring, involved in church plants, until eventually I had an offer to come into Ohio and to actually be the point person for a church plant. But most of it has been about 39 years of pastoral ministry in one form or another.
So as a church planter and as a coach, I guess, for lack of a better term, What's the connection with discipleship?
Wow, it's huge. I make some of these kind of bold statements sometimes, and because I want people to flesh out in conversation, what in the world is he talking about? I don't like just saying, here's the answer, here's what you ought to think, but I want to raise issues. So when I think of church planting, if we just go out, and I've been involved in several church plants, and I've coached and mentored planters, is they will go out and they will plant a church. And over time, you watch and see where this is going, but you see no multiplication. You don't see discipleship like I think the New Testament lays out discipleship. So you can plant churches, and you may or may not get true discipleship as laid out in the New Testament. But if you actually grasp or hang on to what discipleship is, and that takes place, you will end up doing church planting. You can do the same thing. You can be a pastor. And does discipleship necessarily take place inside the church? Not necessarily, because there have been many other things that either distract or poor understanding of what it is, or we replaced it with other things. So if we can get a handle on this, it should be what would drive church planting, church renewal, church growth, all those things, because the principle is discipleship is the core.
So it's like the fundamental building block.
It is the fundamental building block. If we grasp that, renewal, expansion into new territories, church planting, all that will begin to take place by necessity.
So if you could, you mentioned what the Bible says about discipleship. If you could, just in a sentence or two, define discipleship from the biblical perspective.
If I could pull this
or a
off,
paragraph or two.
Yeah. If I could pull this off, honestly, it's funny you even mention that, because a couple years ago I started going up to Kensington, where Steve Anders is the pastor. Very large church, growing. Discipleship is a key thing for them. One of the people up there is Alex McManus, Erwin McManus's brother. He has started this mentoring network, which is geared towards discipleship. Well, he started inviting pastors, interested people, church planter types into conversation all about discipleship. And we are going up every month to have a 2-hour discussion on discipleship. So to put it in a nutshell, and it's like, these are professional people. That's what makes us funny. We are supposed to be the trained professionals and supposed to have a handle on this. And all he does is ask the question, what is discipleship? And the conversation goes whoosh, like this, out in so many different directions. And so discipleship to me, as the scriptures are teaching it, is I become a follower of Jesus in order to walk in his steps, so that I, as Paul would say, until Christ is formed in me. And somehow in that process, well, Romans talks about it, Romans 8:29, that the predestination, not as some people use it, is it was determined before the foundation of the earth that God would find ways to conform us into his image. So discipleship is my walking and being with Jesus in such a way till my life is transformed. Not that I become Jesus. Sometimes people say that. You need to be Jesus to people. No, I need to be me, but I need to be conformed to his values, his way of doing things. I live my life the way he does. I live it to live out whatever God's will is for me. And not only is it about me, it's about me then helping other people to get on that same path. So that, as Paul said, follow me as I follow Jesus. If by chance I get off the path, don't keep following me. Because it's Jesus you need to become like. You need to be worked at until Christ is formed in you, so people can see the reflection of who Jesus is in you. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's discipleship. It's all being conformed and shaped into the image of his Son, to where he's formed in me in such a way that people have a better understanding of God's love for them. It's transformational.
It's interesting that you said about how the direction, when the question, what is discipleship, the conversation goes in so many different directions. I think there's a lot of ambiguity about what constitutes discipleship. And I believe it's one of your convictions that a lot of Christians, a lot of churches think that they are doing discipleship when in fact we're doing a lot of other things, but not making disciples.
Very,
Can you talk
very
about
true.
that a little bit?
Sure. You know what's funny is, again, these are shoes I have to wear. Being in ministry for 39 years plus, I recognize I have lived so much of my life missing it, thinking I knew what it was.
Yeah.
And I've incorporated those things that didn't produce disciples. And so I'm guilty. So I'm not coming as, oh boy, am I the professional? I got it. This is all I do. And if you would just mimic me, boy, you'd have this down pat. So I come as a continual learner in this process. But I do know some of the things from my own life and from my friends who've been in ministry with me. One of them is, in the early days, discipleship, Operation Timothy, where you have this book called Operation Timothy. 1 and 2, you got 2 different sets, and I'd get a bunch of men and we'd gather around and we would work on fill in the blank. Read the scripture, what does it say? Fill in the blank. We're getting the information down, and we're going to do 8 weeks of this, and then we're going to give you a certificate. And said, look at that, you completed this discipleship course. You are one, or at least you're well on your way. And then if you're really interested, we can do Operation Timothy 2. I've done Charles Lake out of Greenwood, Indiana. Actually, he had 4 levels and found out that at the end of 4 levels, he wasn't necessarily getting a disciple. So you know what he did? He added 4 more levels. So now he has 8 levels. You know what you find when you get down to the 8th level? You got a whole lot smarter people and have a whole lot more Bible knowledge. But their lives weren't necessarily transformed. Their marriages didn't seem to always improve. As a matter of fact, sometimes they went the other direction. And so a lot of times we think information, if I just give you the information, it will produce. If that was the case, then to solve this issue of discipleship, anything, educational level, seminary, or whatever it is, if we just give people information, we'll get whatever result we want from them. Then education really would be the solution to all of this. Well, how's that working for us? It's not. It's not in a church. You know, you can evaluate if you're an engineer or whatever in other areas. But at least in the church, information is what we took it for. The other thing we took it for was for programs. That discipleship is a program. We put people in who sign up for X amount of time, X amount of day, X amount of weeks, and we do this program, and somehow you think this program then will produce at the end a disciple. That hasn't worked real well either. It's a little bit like, another way I talk about it is, somebody will say, would you teach us about prayer? Can we have like an 8-week study on prayer? So we create a program. We talk about it. We read all the scriptures. We do all that. We could do it for 8 weeks. And then on a Sunday morning, let's say you're one of the people who signs up for this class. I say, hey, Rob, would you get up in front of all these people and would you lead us in prayer? And the average person in the average church in the pew would say,
No.
No.
I can talk about it.
Yeah, but you don't look at me. I'm breaking out in the hives. Don't ask me to pray. It's not just information, and it's not a program, because we've been doing this for how many years, generations, and we're not getting the end result that I think God means in the area of this transformational thing where Jesus is being formed in me. I mean, does this make sense? Sometimes
Yeah.
I draw on all these things and I'm going, well, am I communicating this?
Yeah, so just to kind of state the objective, what is the end result of discipleship? What is it that we're seeking to accomplish as disciples and making disciples?
Jesus formed in this person in such a way that he now is transformed. And in that transformation, it isn't just about him. Because you could say that's loving God. But the other piece that Jesus said in the Great Commandment is to love others. So now, Christ is formed in you and you got this relationship to the Father. But now it's all about everyone else. And now I have to be on mission to make sure other people go through the same thing that I've gone through. Maybe not at the same speed or whatever, but it's just not about me, it's about other people. So it's me having Christ formed in me and making sure that there are things put in place, mentoring, coaching, discipling, so it happens to everybody else.
So it's not just a qualitative difference in my life, but something happens to me that leads me to be involved in the transformation of others.
Very well said. Because, again, quality is one thing that's to do with me, but it's quantitative. When you look at the Great Commission and he talks about the command, the imperative is to make disciples of all people groups. So it's funny, it doesn't say, at least in that passage, it doesn't say, do it here and then it kind of segments it all. It just says of all people groups. So it's a global thing from the very outset. It's inclusive, it's not exclusive. You do hear him talking about being witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. But when he gives this giant commission statement, it is to make disciples of all people groups. It's just automatically global, which then includes everything and everybody.
It's very inclusive. The Great Commission is his mission that he invites us to participate in as his disciples.
Absolutely. So I like that idea. It is qualitative, but it's also quantitative as well.
You mentioned multiplication a couple times. That's the idea that we replicate ourselves.
Yes. And that's a huge thing. Because in the present way, and I don't know if you want to go this way, but when you think about how we structure the organization or the institution of what we often refer to as a church or a denomination or a network of those kind of things, even how we structure, there are other things that play in here that keep multiplication from ever happening. It might happen by addition, but then we're always working with addition and subtraction. So we have some churches close, and actually then we have maybe plant some new ones or start some new kinds of things, but we're not gaining on the population, we're not gaining on people groups in a way that makes a difference. It was meant to be multiplied. It's the Timothy thing about teach those who can teach others who will teach others, and you see 3 or 4 different levels of that going on. The other piece of it is we sometimes mistake discipleship with leadership. That's, again, those are different things. Leadership often is we're looking for a leader to do this, and then everything works from the top down. Discipleship was meant to go viral, and everybody can be a disciple and a discipler. We think of leadership, we think of a title, we think of a role, we think of a position. But when you think of discipleship, it's turning every believer into this mobile missionary, so that or even in the Great Commission, it's as you are going, make disciples. As you are on the move, wherever it is, whatever you're doing, you're working, you're shopping, you're going to buy gas, you're going to the bank, you're living in a neighborhood, you go extras, whatever it is you're doing, are you on mission to make disciples? That allows multiplication to take place rather than trying to, which we typically do, invite people into what we refer to as the church, the 4 walls, where we meet, school, whatever it is. And that's often then you're thinking about, it's getting people in, usually, and it's also limited because it's a Sunday event. It's a main event, it's Sunday. Mm-hmm. So that's why we gear everything to, but that's not where we encounter most people. So you begin to say, mathematically, this isn't possible the way we presently see church or do church or be the church. It's kind of a lot to swallow and to have to unpack.
Yeah, well, let's start. You had mentioned about the institutions, some of the structural kinds of things. Most of us are involved in a church, and that's what we're familiar with.
Yes.
We think of, as you're talking, we're thinking of in terms of our own context and how things work. And I think for a lot of folks, that's what they think of when they think of discipleship. I want to invite people to come to my church.
Yes.
And yet, that's not what you're talking about. There's
No.
more to it than that.
No, because somehow, with the person in the chair, in the pew, whatever your seating is called, and you think about discipleship is, well, I'm going to invite my neighbors, or I'm going to invite this guy I've been really interested in, or this lady's come over for coffee and we talk, but I want her to become a disciple, so I'll invite her on Sunday. And then if she comes, then discipleship will take place. Well, for one thing, discipleship is a very intentional thing, and there's so many things that squeeze into it. If she comes on Sunday, she may gain some information, she may get into a program, but it doesn't mean that she's going to really know what it truly means to be a disciple, because for her, she may translate, if I go to church on Sunday, I'm a disciple.
Right?
Or I attend a Sunday school class, I'm a disciple. Or, even better, if I consistently give some money, whatever that amount's supposed to be, if I give that, so money and attendance then equals discipleship, rather than a 24/7 life of following Jesus and letting him be conformed into me so that I'm transformed in the process. So that's part of the problem. And so that's why we see, and plus, it's one day.
Right.
And maybe she goes to a Wednesday night prayer meeting if a church still has that. Or some, but it's still, she's still missing that whole transformational piece where she doesn't just see it as information or program based, or I attend church and I give money to church. And somehow just what she's doing makes her the disciple.
Yeah, it's, as you describe it there, very easy to see where we picked up the idea of what's expected of me. Well, not much. Come to church on Sunday, and in many circles, being a Christian is pretty much a spectator sport. We come and sit in church and watch what happens there, and if we come any other time, it's still kind of a spectator thing, but that's not what the Lord is calling us to.
Well, yeah, and you stop and think about it. If I'm just a person who's attending church, I'm coming in with things that I know nothing of. And I wasn't raised in a church, so this was all new environment to me. My going into church, and I think there are a lot of Christians who've been raised in church with the same idea, is that the people who are honestly doing ministry are two levels. Number one, the paid people. The pastor, whatever staff they're paying for, they're paid to do this. Mm-hmm. And maybe some of the volunteers, or people who are in position, so that they're the ones, I am a spectator, really, in that way when I walk in with that thing, because they're paid to do ministry. The people in positions are paid. Not everybody can be in the same, we're occupying the same chair. I'm a Sunday school teacher. How many Sunday school teachers can everybody be that? And if our view is that's what being a disciple is, or whatever, then you do feel like I'm a spectator. Mm-hmm. And then what I then don't stop to think about is that makes me a consumer, and then I want them to do things for me. I'm paying them to do my job, because you know what? I don't know what my job's supposed to be.
I don't know how to do it. I don't really want to do it. I'm glad you're doing it.
Absolutely. And so then we applaud the people in position, or we applaud the paid staff and say they're doing a wonderful job. But they're not getting the job that Jesus intended done, because he wanted all of us 100% participation in this thing.
Yeah. And that's, a lot of folks that are watching this are, pastors, or have, think a lot of their pastors and all that sort of thing. And I think it's important that we clarify it's not just the pastor's job to be involved in discipleship.
Absolutely.
All believers are involved in discipleship. Is that right?
Yes. The troubling passage is, I think it's in 1 Peter 2, maybe 2:9, where he says this thing, and we know it's there, and I don't find anybody who would say, I disagree with it. But we really don't know how it fits into the larger scheme of how we do mission and ministry. Ministry, when I think about the church-related, the body of Christ, and mission outside of that. So I use that to kind of help clarify it, so it gives me a frame of reference to talk in. But it talks about that that all believers are part of the royal priesthood.
Yes.
So the priesthood of all believers should come back and inform our view about this mission that we're on. But it doesn't for the most part. We're not sure what that should look like. We understand more of the organizational and the institutional level of what leadership, paid position, volunteer staff at institutional organizational levels look like. But as far as engaging the world and the priesthood of all believers, it's like, I don't know how to do that. There's got to be a change in language, a change in church culture to do this. I think I said to somebody once, I'm a military person, ex-military, been on a police department, I understand organization, institution, but from the military side, it would be like we have generals and of all varieties, 4 or 5 levels of those, and then we have a major, and we have a captain, and we have a lieutenant, a couple different levels of that, and then all of a sudden, we have no army. So you have all these people at this top level, and you have no army to do anything with. And it's kind of like how the church is. We understand the top level things, but then we have no army to work with. And when you look at Ephesians 4, it gives us 5-fold things about apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. And it says those are gifted people given to the church in order to equip the church to do the works of service or the works of ministry. So they're equipping roles. The problem is we got all the equipping in those 5-fold things, or in the people we bring in to assist, and then we have no army, which would allow multiplication to go viral. And you see in the book of Acts that, notice that it talks about even God, there has to be a persecution that begins to scatter them, and it's significant. And you always wonder, what part in this did they get and not get when it says that they all scattered, but the apostles stayed in Jerusalem? And you go, wow, why didn't they scatter? Why didn't they go out into the frontier? When you normally think of people who are apostolic, they're frontier takers. It doesn't take too long before we move towards the hierarchical system and so develop it and close it off that you have a division between clergy and laity.
Which means people.
Which means people. So how many people do you have in clergy? How many people do you have that are laity? And so even in a worship service, who's treated as an audience in a typical worship service?
Yeah.
People. But who is the audience in worship? Yeah, it's God. Who are the performers? Who's on stage? All of us. But is that the way we do church? No. So this is a big thing. When you talk about this, I recognize, and obviously I'm pretty passionate about this, and it keeps coming out of me, and I try to kind of pull it back a little bit so I don't overpower somebody. And then they go away more confused or saying, man, that man's just a raving lunatic.
Well, I think it'll be helpful for folks to realize, one, that every believer is called, invited to share in the Lord's mission. Yes. And it's designed to be a participatory sport, that yes. We're not called to be spectators, but we're invited to share in that vital role of basically offering it, sharing it with everybody else. And so it's not just for a few select folks, and it's not just for the trained and competent. Because if you look at Jesus' disciples, they were anything but trained and competent when they started.
Bless your heart. Yes. Oh, see, you're bringing up all kinds of other things that go in even to this discipleship piece. But yeah, I tell people discipleship is a contact sport. Right? And so if you think of a football field, but take away all the bleachers, there are no bleachers, and everybody is on the field, because now you're either helping to move this ball into the territory, into the enemy's territory, until you accomplish the goal, or if you're just out there and not involved in the play, you're now blocking the play, because there's no spectator piece. As a matter of fact, the only spectator piece that the scriptures ever talk about is in the book of Hebrews, and to get there, you have to be dead. I mean, yes, that gets the message out. So it's a contact sport. And it isn't just about your taking the ball and running with it, is how do you get all these people who are on the field with you moving in that same direction to accomplish the mission.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is just so huge. But if we ever get it, and we have any level of understanding that it's a contact sport for everybody, everywhere you are, that's when you see things break out. And you see lives being transformed.
Yeah.
And you see unchurched, de-churched people going, I don't know, I don't know what you have, but whatever it is, I'll take it. Help me to find my way.
Well, that takes me back to one of your earlier illustrations, because this is something that we all can do. I mean, the simple command is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And you had used the illustration of somebody having coffee with somebody.
Yes.
And rather than inviting them to church, thinking that's going to be what you need to do and that's going to make them a disciple, isn't it better to just keep having coffee with them?
It's interesting. Somebody just said in the last few days I was having this conversation, and the question came up is, if you are a churched person, that you're trying to be shaped into the image of Christ, Christ is trying to be formed in you, and you go and meet regularly with the body of Christ, and you gather somewhere that we often call church. Wish we'd get rid of that, but probably not going to happen. Have you ever gone anywhere? Do you go anywhere? Or even better, do you pastor somewhere you couldn't invite all the people you know to come and attend there? Do you have a friend if you just attend? Do you have a friend you could never invite to the place where you gather? Because you know they wouldn't get it, or because there's things in there that aren't quite right and you wouldn't put them into that mix. But you stay because, in essence, you feel like that's where God's called you. Mm-hmm. Do you pastor a church where you couldn't invite some of the people you know in your community to your church because you know that this would not be a good mix and they wouldn't accept that person? And then it sours them
Right.
over this. And there are a lot of people say, yep, I understand that. So maybe you're having coffee on a regular basis, and there's two issues words that didn't come up. One is mentoring somebody, and the other is coaching somebody. They're not interchangeable words. Mm-hmm. They are two different things. But somehow, if you're coaching or mentoring someone else, maybe the best place to do that is in the coffee shop, or it's in your home, or it's at a ball game. It's somewhere else as you are living and doing life, rather than necessarily where we gathered on a Sunday or a Saturday night. Mm-hmm. It's a sad thing in many ways, because it means that we're not as open or inclusive, or there's things that we have put up that are barriers or hoops that people cannot jump through. Sociological, economical, whatever. They can't get through. It doesn't become a safe place for them to experience the love of Jesus that invites them in.
Yeah, that's a big issue. You mentioned a safe place. A lot of our churches, are not safe places. A lot of them are gossip centers. A lot of them are very condemning, critical, and if I care about somebody who probably has stuff to talk about, I'm not going to want to introduce them there to that, and yet that doesn't mean that you can't disciple them. It doesn't mean that you can't be involved in their lives. So what are some alternatives to taking them to church?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because here's an issue we didn't talk about. I don't know if it would come up later, whether I should inject it here, but it's like substitution kind of things. Is to deal with on some kind of a timeline about our understanding and language we use to understand what it is. Some people think evangelism and discipleship is the same thing. But also the order in which that happens is important. And if somehow we get a larger perspective of what discipleship is and where evangelism fits in that, would help us also to understand there are some alternatives to disciple somebody other than taking them to the main event once a week or whatever that is, the Sunday worship service, which is typically the main event. So if the typical understanding within Christian environment is, first we evangelize, we share the gospel, and they accept Jesus, and that's what we call evangelism. When a person says, I'm a sinner, I invite Jesus into my life, I ask him to forgive me and walk with me on a daily basis so that conversion takes place. We often say, that's what I work on, and I don't mean to be critical, but in essence it becomes the notch on the belt. We got one. He's in the camp, she's in the camp, boy, girl, old, young, doesn't matter. Evangelism will take place. Now we need to be concerned that now that they become a convert, a Jesus person, that now we begin the discipleship process. And I think for most people, that's kind of the understanding of how we do this. Therefore, it's really important then that somehow, because the other piece is who can do that? When I pastored in Fort Wayne, I used to have a guy who worked for Indiana and Michigan Electric Company who used to call me on a regular basis. He was a salesman, and he would call me at lunchtime. He'd say, Pastor, you got to come quickly. Come to Bill Knapp's or come to a restaurant. I've been talking to this person about Jesus, and they want to become a Christian. You got to come and lead them to Jesus. You got to help them become a Christian. And this guy's been a Christian for years. And he's a personal friend, and I'd say, okay, I'd go do that. And then finally, he would do that to me enough, I'd say, no, I'm not doing it. He says, then they'll never become a Christian. I said, you do it. You know the gospel. You do it. Oh, I can't do that. That's your job.
That reminds me of what Jesus said. He had a whole big crowd there, and the disciples said, they're getting hungry. They need to eat. And Jesus said, well, you give them something to eat.
Go feed them. Yeah, it's such a
And then they said, well, we don't have that much money. We can't feed them. They said, what they say, do you remember? Bring them to me.
Yes, exactly. So a piece of that is we just think evangelism and discipleship. I'm just going to throw it out there. Again, do you have to agree with me? No, you don't. But get in discussion. Go back to the Bible and look at the stories. Look at especially Jesus and the way he did it, the things he said, the words that came out of his mouth, the invitations that he gave, and see what in the world he's talking about. So because maybe at the end, maybe you will agree. Maybe you'll think, this changes the way. So how would it change how you do things and how you do relationships if discipleship starts here where you invite somebody to come along in your God journey with you? Discipleship takes place. Conversion didn't take place. Evangelism didn't take place. But they like you well enough, and notice there's something different about you that they enter into the beginning of the following process. Somewhere along in that process, as they're learning and as they understand there's commitments and trust and all these other things that come into this thing, they finally say, okay, I've followed you long enough, but I know there's still something missing in me. I don't have the power to keep doing this. Oh, let's talk about it. So discipleship begins somewhere in this following. True evangelism and conversion takes place. And the invitation now is a personal relationship between them and Jesus, where now this relationship begins in a very unique way, and the discipleship process then continues, and by the way, doesn't stop because you took a 32-week program. But it's a life of walking with Jesus until you see where the New Testament talks about, when's it complete? Not in this life. We don't know what we're going to be, but we do know this, that when we see Jesus face to face, we will be like him. And so it's this continual growth process. So evangelism is just somewhere along that line. And Jesus' statement to the disciples, to the fishermen, to Matthew, the tax guy, was, "Come, follow me." And I think, you might pinch me on this one. I think he said, "Come, follow me. Come, learn of me." Before the invitation is, "Come, learn from me." Because again, we buy into the person before we buy into everything else that they know. And so, come learn of me. I am meek. I am mild. This is my, all these statements that where he's trying to reveal the Father. And so that they can learn of him, so they can learn of the Father. And it's all about this unique relationship, an invitation to come along. And people began that walk, and they are learning and growing in disciples. And there are points at which people said, I'm not liking this. Out they go. And even the disciples come along, and they're struggling. And they're saying, you got to change what you're saying. You're saying some hard things about what's this eating flesh and drinking blood stuff. I mean, don't you want more people? They're leaving. And Jesus says to Peter, do you want to leave? Do you want to go too? Where else would we go? Who else has the words of life?
Yes.
And they continue the process with some real ups and downs, kinds of denial and coming back and facing the relationship again. Conversations on the beach.
That brings up an important piece too. Discipleship has a cost. I mean, people come into it recognizing the value, and they stay with it recognizing the value. But you're biting off more than you realize when you follow Jesus. And along the line, there's like the scriptures say, there's the questions. People may fall away, they may back off, but Jesus' disciples recognize there's nowhere else to go. You're the one that we're following because you have the words of life. But in our churches, there's a lot of pressure, expectations to not, maybe to not talk about those hard things that might discourage people or keep people away. And in some ways, I'm not sure we're even truthful about what's involved in following the Lord when we do that.
I know that's true. I mean, I know it from my own life. And that's a piece where openness, transparency, truth-telling, of helping people to understand those of us in leadership. I don't care if you're a Sunday school teacher, you're a volunteer, you're unpaid, and working 70 hours a week, it doesn't matter. Or you're the pastor, you're an elder, you're a deacon, you're a trustee, or whatever, you're a church planter, is to be open and vulnerable, especially in this area where, quite frankly, I sometimes doubt me, doubt God, doubt my calling, or it becomes so difficult that there are times when I say, I really don't want to do this any longer. And I have, over 39 years, at different times said, you know what, and I've told my wife, and I don't always tell her either, because there's a certain amount of, you make people insecure if you do this in such a way sometimes, or too often. But I said, you know what, it would be a whole lot easier for me to go punch a clock at 7 o'clock in the morning till 3:30. And when I'm done, I'm done. And work on a machine, it may break down, but it's not going to sass me. It's not going to fight me because there are things that govern it, that it's predictable. People are unpredictable. And as I've said, just like me, they are never finished products. You can't kick this thing out the end and say, voila, a fully devoted saint who's never going to have any problems and no breakdowns. Doesn't happen.
Put them in a box and send them off.
That's right. Ship them. Put a label. Sometimes you want to ship them a whole lot further than just something local. Yeah, you see what happens? And so there have been times, and actually it has been. I have done other things. I have gone to work in a factory, third shift, building axles. Well, you know what? I only did that for a few months, and I thought, I whined and I cried and said, oh, woe is me. Get me out of here, God. Oh, I'd rather be back in ministry. And you know what? He just left me in there for quite a while until I came to the conclusion that I could have a ministry in that factory, and I submitted and I said, if you want me to work here the rest of my life, building axles, working quality control, whatever it is, God, I am done fighting you. I submit to you. You know better than me. Within 6 weeks of that submission, somebody contacted me and said, we have an open door. Actually, it was in a homeless shelter. We need a program director and a chaplain back in vocational ministry. Would you be interested? And I went, wow. But, my wife would say, oh boy, you got to quit saying that you went out or you just want to go punch a clock. One of these times, God's going to say, okay. But that's part of it. And I recognize this discipleship piece, being vulnerable and saying, hey, you struggling in your Christian life? Did you know I do too? I do too. Sometimes I wonder if this is worth it. I didn't want to get up here on Sunday morning and preach, quite frankly. Whether it's you, or it's me, or it's a combination. I didn't want to be, emotionally, I didn't want to be here. So I know that when people come in, whether it's to a discipleship class, a Sunday school class, or the main event of worship, there are people coming in who had to work against their emotions and how they feel or think that day.
And you touched on another thing when it comes to the church. A lot of folks are not involved in vocational ministry, right. But that doesn't mean that they're not in ministry. A lot of people will spend their entire lives working in the shop or teaching school or any number of jobs, but the truth is the Lord has a way of strategically overseeing our lives and planting us where He wants us, and His calling to us to the Great Commission to make disciples involves blooming where we're planting and using whatever He has given us to do as a way of building relationships and building bridges with people and finding inroads into their lives.
See, that's the piece when I mentioned one of the things we do is we substitute or we confuse leadership and discipleship.
Yes.
And so there's only so many positions for leadership, and usually those are inside the church organization and structures. But discipleship is meant to be everywhere, not just in this organizational structure or in this institution or the thing that we often identify church. But ministry and discipleship is meant to be what you exactly said. It's bloom where you're planted. And you think about it, you think about two things that I think about. One is natural gifting. There are reasons. There are different natural gifts. And not everybody has all of them. And not everybody has the same ones. And it's like God naturally gives certain abilities. I saw a little 2-year-old who dribbled a basketball. I mean, what is that? I still can't dribble a basketball, and I've played basketball since the 4th grade, okay? Does that tell you anything? And this little 2-year-old's dribbling it. He even put it behind his back a couple times and did it pretty well. I'm going, okay, so why does God give natural abilities? to everybody. Even special needs people often have unique gifts and abilities that are sometimes overlooked because of their handicaps. But if you watch, you'll find out there's something very good at. Some of them are very intuitive relationally. They feel the vibes that you and I may never feel, and they know that person's hurting. And they just automatically go towards them. It's like, whoa. So what happens is, it's God's way of saying, in this world, you are needed. Somebody needs the unique thing. Somebody needs to be able to come and fix my air conditioner in my car. It's hot in there. It's busted. And when the air is 95 degrees outside, it's no big help. My air conditioner in my home is busted. There's plumbing, there's a chimney, there's all these different things. I need what other people can provide. But you know what? There are people who need what I naturally have been gifted with from birth. Just natural abilities to work in certain areas. Then you pick up spiritual gifts, which are not the same. Natural gifts say, the rest of the world needs me, and I need the rest of the world. We're not born to be in isolation from one another. We are social, community, developed people, and we do need to be in community with one another. But spiritually then, when a person becomes a Christian, there are spiritual gifts that become operative, which makes you an absolute necessary ingredient part into the body of Christ. For you to be able to engage in unique ways, because there are needs represented in the body. You need what I have at times, and I need what you have at times. And you multiply that for everybody who, in fact, knows Jesus. And when that begins to work in ministry and mission, discipleship then looks like, you know, when I shop at Meijer. If you're not from this community, you don't have a Meijer, you don't understand, but it's like a Kroger, Great Scott,
Big grocery
Giant
store.
Eagle, big grocery store kinds of things, Dominic's, I'm trying to think of all the ones over the years where I've ever moved. When I go to the gas station to get gas, or I go and I buy, I'll just pick the gas one, because now it's convenient. You can never have really contact with the person who is the clerk. And you can put your credit card in, debit card, credit card, doesn't matter, and you can do that and never come in contact. I never play by that. Because I can be on mission to create disciples. When I go to Meijer, I always put pay inside, even though I have a credit card. I go inside, I always call the clerk by name, I always engage in conversation. A lot of times for me, I'm a goofy kind of a guy, it'll be something silly or whatever. But I will know who they are. I know who the manager is, I know who the employees are, I know who gets fired, I know something about their families. I know in one case, a person, their wife died, took in a mother-in-law, committed to the mother-in-law, she died. I'm going, what kind of guy is this? Let's talk about it. So, and he knows me, and yeah, I know his name. I know all. And so what I'm doing is I'm building Jesus connections. I want to hear their story. And pretty soon, if I hear their story, they're going to say, why would you even care? And you call me by, nobody calls me by name. Or I ask them, hey, how's your day going? They say, man, do you really want, yeah, I want to know. Because if there's a way that I can pray for you. So all it is you ask, does it have to occur in this setting? No. It can occur when I go check out books from the library, tapes from the library. When I go shop, I don't take the self-serve thing, by the way, where I can check myself out. Because that means I don't have to encounter anybody. I don't always like the longest line, but I do like a line, because now I have contact with people.
Creating opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The people at the bank, who are they? Who are they? And what's their story? So, I used to just go hang out at a mall. Actually, when I did church planting and I was the point person to come to Findlay, it was a parachute drop. In other words, it wasn't off from another church. It wasn't another group that said, yeah, we're going to send a group. It was just my wife, myself and my 4 kids. And I set a goal to meet 25 new people every single day. And I drove over from Indiana to Findlay, once we determined it was Findlay, to meet 25 people every day just to hear people's stories. So I'd go to the mall, I'd go to the park, I'd go into businesses, I'd talk to the clerks, I'd say, do you have a manager? And I'd ask about and it's just to begin to build relationships, to see what God would do.
And for folks who aren't in the process of building a church, but are just involved in the process of making disciples in the world in which the Lord's planted them, there's already those people in their lives. There's already relationships in the works. And so is there maybe any helpful hints? You've thrown out a few, but are there any other helpful hints for folks to be able to begin to see those relationships that are already in existence as tools for making disciples?
Yeah, and where you throw in a plug, but actually I have created, it's from Verge Network, and you probably go on Verge and get it, but I also print off these little things about how to think discipleship and how to be on mission for Jesus, whether it's at work, whether it's in your neighborhood, whether it's where you shop, whether it's where you exercise, and all the different ways in which you are in constant motion in your life, 24/7. And it actually has all these kinds of ways in which you could do this. If you got somebody in the hospital, it's not just about that. Maybe God put somebody in the hospital not just for that person in the hospital that but for the person that's in the room beside them. It may be for the nurse who comes in. It could be for the doctor. It's just the principle is I leave no stone unturned, as you would put it. In other words, no possible human contact undeveloped, or at least the possibility of trying to develop that particular human contact sport of discipleship. You see your neighbor out. If you're a lady and you see the neighbor lady out, she's walking to the mailbox. You don't know her, or it doesn't matter. You invite her in. Say, hey, make a coffee cake. Put on some fresh coffee and just say, hey, you want to come over and have coffee? I don't know if we really spent time together. And you don't have to say a lot. See, I think that's just where the hang-up is.
Right.
When we talk about our God stories, I don't tell when I'm working and I'm trying to have internships or I'm working with somebody and I want them to go out and learn to do this. I say you got to go out and you got to find 25 people a week in which to encounter God's story. And I'm not telling you to tell your God story. I'm telling you to get them to tell their God story. Right. Where are they with maybe their starting block, maybe they're way behind, God, who's that? Or no, I don't want anything to do with him. Wherever, just because people want to tell their stories. All you got to do is just ask the question and shut up. And let them talk. Mm-hmm. You do that enough time, you know what, they'll go away and say, that's the nicest person. Do you believe? Why, they're just so wonderful. And you didn't say anything. Mm-hmm. You let them talk. Yeah. And it's like, so it's coffee. It's at the bank. Hey, how's the day going? Here's a fun one. If you're going into a store, and I do this, and my family doesn't even want to hang out with me when I do this, is if I'm at Walmart, it's Christmas time. It's long days. It's crowded people. I will look for the checkout person who looks like they've had it. Sour-faced. They've been curt with the last 25 people who have gone through their lane, and that's who I will go try. That's the lane I will pick. Look for don't look just for the happy person. Mm-hmm. Look for the person. It shows on their face. And I've walked up to a person and said, wow, I got to imagine this has been an awfully long day. And now you have one more customer, and it's me. I just apologize ahead of time because I know it's getting closing time. And I know Christmas is really hectic. And he said, man, a lady said, if you only knew. I said, customer service is one of the highest burnout rate kind of occupations you can have. If there was a way that I could just brighten your day in one bit, I would do it. Even if you said you were working tomorrow and you said to me, don't come and shop tomorrow. And of course, you know what they did? They laughed. Mm-hmm. And this lady at this time, because I did this lady said, you know what, this is the first time I've laughed in a long time. You make me laugh.
That's better than a cup of cold water.
It is. It is. You made me laugh. So again, to me they seem simple, but again, I think about this stuff constantly. I'm not perfect at it, but a soccer team, your kid plays in a soccer team, go. Mm-hmm. Go. Sit next to where some other people are.
And that's basically that intentionality, recognizing that the Lord has called you to make disciples, and He's placed you where He's placed you.
Sure.
And this is what's involved in being one of His disciples.
And you don't have to. You know, sometimes people say, this is so difficult. Well, Jesus isn't telling you to go into the places where there is no receptivity either. Mm-hmm. Think about when He sent them out 2 times that we get, and we don't know. There may have been others, 2 that are recorded, where He sent the 12 out. And they kind of come back and they kind of miss some things along the way. And they kind of begin to argue about who's the greatest and the least going to be the greatest and least in the kingdom. And I think Jesus has such a great sense of humor. While they're doing that, you know what He does? Because again, they think they're it. We are the pinnacles of His leadership. Who's going to be on the right? Who's going to be on the left? Let's send Mom to go ask. Great stuff. He turns around and immediately, in this context, sends out 72 more. Can you imagine the 12 going, wait, why are they going out? Because it's bigger than you guys. And then the neat thing is that He says to both of them, look for a person of peace. If they don't receive you, I'm not telling you need to stay there. This is about connections. This is about receptivity. It's about hunger for God things. So if you sense there's a person of peace and you sense there's some hunger, develop it. Go with it. If you sense there's no receptivity, move on. Because somewhere there's going to be some contact where people just feel drawn to you because there's something about your eyes, or something about your face, something about your spirit, and there'll be a connection. And they may not fully understand it, but you do, because you know it's God's Spirit drawing. Because it's His work anyway, not mine.
I think that's such a helpful realization that God is on a mission. He is after us, and that it's not for us to initiate. He's already initiated it. Yeah. And when we walk into the mall, when we walk into the school or soccer game or wherever, God's already on the scene. He's already got those folks in His sights, and we're really stepping into something that's already in motion.
One of the funny things you mentioned that is in the John 4 passage. I love anchoring, because I think it's where it's got to come from anyway, is to find Bible stories that anchor these truths. And sometimes they occur and you scratch your head and it's real easy to miss. But in John 4, when He's talking to the Samaritan woman, I mean, you study history and you pick up what were their attitudes towards Samaritans in Samaria, and you know that, and you're looking at geography and roads, and you know there's a bypass to get around Samaria. You don't have to go through the middle. And Jewish people did not go through the middle of Samaria. They'd take the bypass and go around. It's kind of like Detroit or Indianapolis or whatever. It's like, oh, let's get away from this. Oh, man, I'm not going down there. I'm going to take the bypass. You know, even Findlay, 40,000 people. And they talk about 99 being the bypass. Because, I don't want to go down I hate Tiffin Avenue kind of a thing.
Right.
For those of you who have been here, you understand this, because I live just off Tiffin Avenue. So, but give me a bypass. So here it is. Jesus is there. He's talking to a Samaritan woman. Talking to a woman is bad enough, but He's talking to a Samaritan woman, and He's talking to one whose lifestyle has been anything but exemplary. And so he's talking to her, and they come back, and they're shocked that he's talking to this Samaritan woman. And of course, he's talking. But then he says something to them. He said, open your eyes. And I referred to it a little bit earlier, just didn't unpack it all the way. Open your eyes. The fields are white unto harvest. And you go, but are we out looking at a farmer's field? No. We're in Samaria. We're at the well. We're at the place where people come to congregate. Although she picked noon because she didn't want all the hassles and all the gossip of other women. But it's like, Jesus, have you lost? Do you know where we are? What are you? What could you possibly mean that the fields are white? And then he added the puzzling piece. He said, guys, you are going to reap a harvest that you did not sow. And we pass over that. I passed over it. I don't know how many times I've preached or taught or read this passage. And I'm thinking, okay, I've got this. No clue the depth of this thing. Because you said it. God was there long before the disciples ever understood what was going on. And he has been sowing seeds of hunger, questions, discontent, not satisfied with what's going on, with lots of excuses. You have your place, we have our place. But that statement to them, you guys are going to reap what you did not sow. You mean God? God is where? He's working? I mean, it's the Jonah stuff with Nineveh? You mean, Jonah's suspicious of it, you know? Doggone it. I knew if I went there. See, somehow he understood it. The disciples didn't. It's like, you mean you've been here? Yeah, I've been here. I've been sowing seeds in this abandoned place long before you guys ever came into the middle of town. So the places that we have abandoned doesn't mean God hasn't been there.
So maybe that would be something for us to consider, is that wherever we happen to be, God already is. And he's encouraging us, open your eyes, look around. I've been chipping away at these hearts. I love these people. I laid down my life for them. And you, one of my disciples, I put you in their life for a reason.
Yeah, and you raised a question earlier. Those of us called into ministry were a sense of calling. I always wonder about that. I run into Christians who've pumped me at this, and maybe they're right. Maybe we have done too much of segregating this thing. Is there not a sense of calling on everybody to live out their faith in unique ways? To live out this life of Jesus 24/7? Do they have a calling? The guy's a mechanic? You know, we've done some harm to ourselves. Anyway, that's a discussion maybe of something else. But it does get to the issue of how does the average person who's just trying to know God and love him and know what that means in relationship to other people around them who make up their entire life and the contacts they have, what does that mean for them in being a witness and a disciple and a discipler and their responsibility to do that?
Yeah, I think you're hitting at the right thing. I mean, when Jesus calls us to follow him, he calls us to be disciples. Yeah. And being a disciple involves making other disciples, being involved in the process of his making other disciples.
One of the strangest, there's a couple of them, but there's one that's pretty dramatic of the stories of Jesus and his encounters with people and the transformation he does. The one that fascinates me is the guy that was possessed by demons. And he sets him free. The guy's been naked, he's been chained, and he has this encounter and nobody's been able to help him. And he's a young man, and here he's entrapped by a power that he cannot break free. No one else can break him free, and Jesus sets him free. And as they get ready to get in the boat and leave, he wants to go with them. Fascinating. And Jesus told him no. You go, wait. I mean, this just blows my mind. I thought that was... But he tells him to go home. Go home. It's okay to go home. So the whole discipleship process, the encounter, the close encounter of the human and divine kind in Jesus, transforms this man, sets him free, and says, go live your life and tell people about me and what he's done for you. That truly is discipleship in the strangest way, because again, he didn't say, come and follow me, and after 72 weeks or 3 years or whatever it is, then you'll be a disciple. He's experienced this life-giving transformation.
Right.
And Jesus says, go home. Go home.
Tell your story.
And tell your story. Isn't that great? I mean, this just makes me smile. Because it isn't calling us all into lockstep.
Right.
So that we're all on the same march, in the same journey, in the same step. No, it's not wearing the same uniform.
Right.
You go, God is amazing.
Yeah.
He is amazing.
Well, as we wrap this first session up, I'm going to put you on the spot. I meant to tell you this, but I forgot. But,
Oh, thank you.
It'd be good maybe to end each session with a challenge. So as we've been talking about this stuff, off the top of your head, maybe is there a challenge that you could leave us with pertaining to what we've talked about?
Well, yes. Since this is geared towards PTI, it's about leadership, discipleship, interestingly, because discipleship, again, is the larger piece. But if we in leadership don't get this, we're going to be fighting the wrong battles. So maybe the large umbrella challenge is, if you're going to be in vocational ministry in a leadership position, to avoid the numbers or the rear ends in the seat game or the offering game, which is typically the metrics, to think more about how do I help in the process of getting Jesus Christ formed in an individual to where they now are on mission of being a disciple and a discipler. How do I do that in a leadership position? To think, not main event, but total participation of God's people, the priesthood of all believers, wherever they are in their station of life and what they're doing. How do I think that? That, if you can't understand why I'm doing this and the mission I'm going to be on, you will be on everybody else's mission but God's. Is that enough of a...
Yeah.
Does that identify challenge?
Yeah, and what about folks that are not in the leadership role, but folks that are involved in churches that work some other place throughout what would the challenge be for those folks?
Twofold. One is you could become an agitator, and I say that somewhat tongue in cheek. But if you're connected to a local congregation somewhere, the challenge would be to begin to have this conversation on a larger level of what discipleship is and is not, and how has it gotten sidetracked. We have shut down a reproductive system in the church. That's one side. But the other side then is to honestly ask Jesus on a regular basis, as I leave the house, or as I get up in the morning. It doesn't have to be a long prayer. Some of you aren't morning people. But how do I engage of being on mission, of making disciples of any people group that, in fact, I encounter this day? What would that look like for me to hear someone else's God story? Jesus, you're going to have to help me. I'm not even a conversationalist. I don't even know how to begin to do this, and ask Jesus to help you. Because he told the disciples, don't worry about what to say. I will put the words in your mouth.
Yes.
Take that as an invitation for you to say, I'm starting my day with this. It may mean an inconvenience. It may mean that you get delayed doing something because, quite frankly, that's a God-ordained God event. It's a Kairos moment. It's a God time. And ask God and tell him you're willing to have those, and you watch what happens. It may not happen that one day. I promise you, he may test you in this. Will you stay at this? Because I'm telling you, they'll start happening. And if you're faithful in it, they're going to start happening with great rapidity. So my challenge is you engage in conversation in the place where you go to assemble as the church to worship or to learn or whatever, and then engage. Ask God to help you engage where you live, work, play, shop, and all those things.
Very good. Sounds like a challenge.
It is a challenge.
Well, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'm always concerned that, ooh, that's a lot of stuff and that's a lot of talking.
Well, we're just getting started.
Okay.